Well, good evening and Happy New Year. I'm James McPherson, filling in for Andrew Bolt, who's back next week. Coming up tonight, the ABC under fire for last night's woke and politically charged Sydney fireworks coverage. A shocking rise in anti-Semitic attacks since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. We'll give you the figures. Australian-born Princess Mary is set to become Queen of Denmark. I'll speak to a royal expert. And is Australia heading for a recession in 2024? We'll have a full economic outlook for you. But first, goodbye to 2023, the year that delusions were broken and everything became clear. 2023 was the year we learned that when Islamic terrorists take babies hostage, far more people around the world will march in support of the terrorists than in support of the babies. It was the year we learned that people in this country can call for the extermination of those they don't like, and our elites will simply shrug their shoulders. Sure, a mob yelled, "Gas the Jews," on the steps of the Opera House, and a warning, this content is distressing. But did they really yell, "Gas the Jews"? Maybe you just thought you heard that. We'll investigate and get back to you. And yes, an Islamic sheikh in Western Sydney called the rape, slaughter and kidnapping of Jewish women and children a cause for celebration.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
But that's not hate speech, it's just part of the rich tapestry of multiculturalism. Some Australians get excited by their football team, other Australians get excited by a terror attack on Jews. What's the difference? And besides, diversity is our strength. And sure, an imam in Western Sydney did tell his congregation that a day will come when Jews will be hunted down and killed.
To the invading Jews we say, by Allah, the day you will be kicked out of Palestine is coming. A day when the stones and the trees will speak and say, "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him."
But that's not incitement. It doesn't meet the threshold. What's the threshold for hate speech against Australian Jews? Well, honestly, I couldn't tell you. All I know is that we do have hate speech laws, and if anyone ever says anything worse than "gas the Jews," will there be consequences? Maybe not. Hate speech is very hard to define. Our security agencies have warned that there's potential for a terrorist attack on Australian soil, and we should speak up if we see anything unusual. Now, by unusual, we don't mean a man walking into a woman's bathroom. Report that as unusual, and you'll definitely be prosecuted for hate speech. That's an easy one. 2023 was the year we learned that in this country, police will arrest law-abiding citizens to prevent a breach of the peace rather than protect them because, well, it's just easier than dealing with those who actually threaten violence.
Been arrested in relation to arrested
for doing what?
For what?
Having a flag.
Breaching the peace. I'm
having a flag.
Breaching the peace.
Having a flag.
Oh, come on, mate. You can have my
There's 100 flags in there.
Sydney police famously removed a man waving an Israeli flag from city streets for his own safety, of course. Pro-Palestinian activists are even more safety conscious. They want all Israelis removed from Israel, again, for their own safety. What's the difference? Only one of scale. Anti-Israel activists just have more imagination than New South Wales police, who clearly need to think bigger. 2023 was the year delusions were shattered and things became crystal clear. While Australian Jews wondered if they were safe in this country, Australian Senator Mehreen Faruqi proudly posed for a photograph next to a schoolgirl holding a sign saying that Jews were trash, needing to be taken out. Senator Faruqi is the deputy leader of Australia's third most popular political party. No one cared. Well, I mean, the Australian Jewish community cared, but no one who mattered cared. Faruqi is still in the Senate. She's still the deputy leader, and her social media bio still boasts that she is an anti-racist. Now, she did eventually delete the photograph from her social media, but she never apologised for it. Outright anti-Semitism among Australian politicians isn't wrong. Senator Faruqi was just a little early. But give it time, because our public schools will ensure there's an appetite for it in the very near future. Less than 8 weeks after Hamas terrorists and Gaza civilians wearing keffiyehs slaughtered Jews, the New South Wales Teachers Federation and the Australian Education Union encouraged teachers to wear keffiyehs in the classroom, to help the kids better understand Hamas, the conflict. Speaking of school students, we learned in 2023 that our kids are more likely to participate in an anti-Israel protest than they are to graduate with an A in physics.
What do you think of Hamas?
I think they're doing a good job. I think they should stand up for what's right. They should protect our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
What do you think of Hamas? Hamas?
What is that?
We also learned that far from being a problem, this is perfect preparation for higher education.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
That, of course, was Harvard University President Claudine Gay saying that student calls for the genocide of the Jews might be okay, depending on the context. Perhaps 2024 will be the first year Western universities hand out keffiyehs to graduating students rather than diplomas. Oh, your son finished uni. He did. He graduated with a bachelor in Jew hatred, of course majoring in economics. We're very proud. I'm joking, of course, but after 2023, we're not laughing. Well, since the horrific Hamas terror attacks on October 7 last year, there's been a shocking rise in anti-Semitism around the world. The situation's become so bad here in Australia that many Jewish residents in Sydney were too scared to venture out last night for New Year's Eve celebrations. And this morning, a 76-year-old Jewish doctor was hospitalised after being beaten in the head as he collected his rubbish bins in the Melbourne suburb of Brighton. Police have arrested a man in relation to that attack, and shockingly, police say they intend to release the alleged attacker on summons. Now, recent Victoria Police figures published in the Herald Sun show there were 153 anti-Semitic incidents recorded between October 7 and December 20. 153, that's compared with 28 anti-Muslim incidents. Now, accounting for population differences, those statistics mean Jewish Victorians are 32 times more likely than Muslim Victorians to face a hate incident during that period. Joining me now is Australian Jewish Association President David Adler. David, are you surprised by those statistics? Because if you listen to politicians and law enforcement officials, you'd think that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were equally problematic right now.
James, we are shocked by those statistics, and we're shocked by what's happened in Australia, across Australian society. I didn't expect in my lifetime to see the explosion of anti-Semitism. But the statistics that you quoted are really only the surface. If you look at the nature of the incidents, they're completely different. We have had numerous death threats, we've seen assaults in our community, and perhaps if I relate a question and answer in a meeting I had with counter-terrorism police a few weeks ago, because we had been passing information to them about various threats against the Jewish community. And many of these, unfortunately, as implied by those statistics, arose out of the Muslim community. Not all, but many did. And I asked them, have there been any significant threats from the Jewish community directed at Muslims?
Right.
And their answer was zero. So I think the Islamic ones tend to be insults on social media or perhaps an insult in the streets. But in terms of significant threats that come to the police attention, it's one-way street.
I want to take you through a few incidents I saw over the weekend. Have a look at this protest on New Year's Eve in Melbourne. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Sure.
5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a terrorist state. 1, 2, 3, 4. Occupation terror. 5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a terrorist state. No celebration.
So, David, with those sort of protests on the streets New Year's Eve, no wonder the Jewish community was saying we don't feel safe to go out and celebrate the new year.
Well, we actually encourage people to go out and to do normal activities. But what you're seeing there is propaganda. It's not based on fact. It doesn't provide any sort of balance. It doesn't comment on the terrorism that provoked the conflict. And it shouldn't be happening on Australian streets. I mean, we believe in the right to protest and free speech, but this is getting very, very close to incitement.
Yeah.
It's inciting hatred against a particular community. It's getting very close in some cases to inciting violence. And we are disappointed that our law enforcement authorities haven't been more rigorous in applying the law.
I think you're being very generous saying they haven't been more rigorous. They haven't been anywhere near rigorous at all. Give me your thoughts on this anti-Israel protest in Sydney, where a child is used to lead chants against Jews.
Resistance is justified when Palestine is occupied.
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 David, when you've got a kid saying that resistance is justified, by which I presume the rape, the beheadings, the murders, the hostages of Jewish people, aren't we just creating another generation of Jew haters in this country with antics like that? I mean, it's highly irresponsible.
100%, James. What you're seeing there is very close to the sort of brainwashing that Hamas does in the UNRWA schools. The teaching of hatred, the teaching of anti-Semitism, the teaching that they must sacrifice their blood for the cause. They do it by chants, they do it by propaganda, they do it by indoctrination, and they start at kindergarten level. There are many videos of kindergartens doing what we would regard as plays, but they're actually role-playing terrorism. This is the first step that we've seen on the streets of Sydney.
Yeah, horrific. I want to show you an image that I saw over the weekend. It's an Abolish Australia shirt draped in a Palestinian flag. I want to ask you, David, does that suggest there's more to anti-Semitism than just anti-Israel protests? Do you think there's a general hatred of Western civilization involving many of these people and the motivations for their protests?
It's a really interesting observation that, I mean, Abolish Australia is a very powerful message.
Yeah.
And what we have been finding is that if you're into one of the isms, if you're into socialism, if you're into communism, if you're into Nazism, if you're into Islamism, in other words, an ideology which is contrary to Western society, which is contrary to Judeo-Christian values, then almost reflexly you will have, consciously or unconsciously, a hatred of Israel.
Right.
You will campaign, because that's where it all began. That's where the Judeo-Christian values began. That's where the moral codes of the Ten Commandments and the subsequent developments were implemented. That's where both the Judeo and Christian side began. So we are seeing an active undermining of Western civilization. It's not an exaggeration to say this is a civilization war and that Israel versus Hamas is just the tip of the iceberg. Abolish Australia, I mean, what's that got to do with a conflict in Gaza?
It's interesting you say that, because there is support for the Jewish community coming from Christians in Australia, and the Australian Christian lobby have begun a campaign against anti-Semitism.
Look, this is very heartwarming and we're very grateful for it, because there have been times, frankly, when the Jewish community has felt both vulnerable and isolated. And to learn a couple of weeks ago that the Australian Christian lobby was launching a campaign against anti-Semitism, and one of the initiatives is an online petition. And if I might appeal to all the Sky listeners.
Do it.
Simply to go to the ACL website, which is acl.org.au. Sign the petition if you oppose anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, or religious or not. If you are prepared to put your name to opposing anti-Semitism, it costs nothing. It's something that everyone can do, and we would like to deliver a massive sign of support to the authorities that they need to be more effective.
Terrific. I'd encourage everybody to do that. David Adler, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, James.
Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but events in the Middle East, as well as the ongoing war in Ukraine, will only exacerbate the cost of living crisis already hurting so many households here in Australia. It costs a small fortune to fill your grocery trolley, and we haven't even talked about filling your fuel tank. Inflation is still high, unemployment is rising, and the prospect of more rate rises is still very real. Joining me now is Leith Van Onselen, an economist who's worked for the Australian and Victorian Treasury and is co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au. Leith, the Australian Retail Association reported that Australians will spend $24 billion on Boxing Day sales. That's a 1.6% increase on last year. But then again, prices are higher and we've got a lot more people in the country. So what does that result tell us about where the economy is at?
Well, James, it actually tells us that Australians are actually doing it pretty tough at the moment. Now, that 1.6% increase in Boxing Day sales comes against population increase of about 2.4%, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And we've also obviously had inflation of around 5%. So once you strip those two things out of the equation, it basically means that real retail sales would have fallen by about 6% over that period. And that effectively tells you that households have cut back on their expenditure. Individual households have, and it's only been offset by effectively inflation and obviously the huge growth in the population.
So with that result, I mean, last year there were fears that we'd enter into a recession. That didn't eventuate. To what extent did high migration numbers prevent a recession last year? And can migrants save us again in 2024? Indeed, is that even desirable policy?
Yeah, well, absolutely. The only thing that saved Australia from a recession was obviously its turbocharged record immigration that we had last year. Now, the most recent data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics said that we received 518,000 net overseas migrants in the 2022-2023 financial year. And what that did was that actually increased the population by 2.4%. Now, if you strip those numbers out, you strip the growing population out, Australia's GDP in per capita terms actually fell for 3 consecutive quarters last year, all the way through to September, which is the most recent data. And what that tells you is that effectively the overall economy has been growing, the economic pie has been growing, but everyone's slice of the pie has actually shrunk. And that's not desirable, obviously. And I think we're probably going to get a similar situation this year. Immigration should fall a bit. The federal government's projected 375,000 net overseas migrants, which is obviously a decent reduction, but that still would be the second highest in Australia's history. And I think we're going to have another year whereby the economy grows, but everyone's slice of the pie continues to shrink because it doesn't grow fast enough to soak up the extra people.
Just help me understand, in terms of migration, I mean, obviously it helps the economy, but is that a desirable way for the government to keep the economy out of recession, or does that just mask underlying problems which will hit us later down the track?
Oh, absolutely, it masks underlying problems. Look, if I had my way, I would not allow the economy to be reported as the key metric of GDP growth, which is basically the overall economy. I'd basically make the statistical agencies report everything in per capita terms, because that's what matters. For individual households, for individual Australians, it's basically how their individual circumstances are changing that matters. It doesn't matter what the overall economy is doing. If we're simply just adding people to the economy to make it grow and to make the overall pie larger while everyone's share of the pie shrinks and living standards falls, I think that's self-defeating policy. And that's effectively been Australia's economic policy over the last 15 years or nearly the last 20 years. It's basically been to fire hose in as many people as we can, make the economy grow, avoid recessions, while individual living standards basically haven't improved or in many cases have gone backwards.
Yeah, I think many people would agree with you on that. Looking internationally, things are pretty gloomy. Overnight, we had the US Navy destroy 3 boats carrying Houthi militants after they attacked a container ship in the Red Sea. Those attacks are now putting real pressure on the global shipping industry. It's a long way away from Australia, but do you see a situation where that starts to have an effect on the cost of goods here in Australia?
Look, James, I sincerely hope not. One of the good news stories that had arisen over the past few months was that we've actually had global goods deflation. So what that means is anything that arrives into countries by boat, so all your imported goods, that type of thing, has been falling in price. And that's basically was a reversal of what happened over the pandemic, where we had obviously supply bottlenecks everywhere, and that drove up prices viciously. Because economies have been slowing at the same time as we had all the supply come back online, we're actually getting downward pressure on inflation. Now, the risk of these attacks is that obviously that process reverses and we start getting these supply shortages and bottlenecks again, because we basically can't get goods from country A to country B. If that escalates and becomes, a much more pervasive problem, that'll be a problem not just for the globe, but will also filter down to Australia, given that pretty much all our goods that we get into this country are imported. And that could see interest rates remain high for longer, which is not what we want.
All right, we certainly don't want that. Give us some good news. What's your best case economic scenario for Australia in 2024? Encourage us a little bit, Leith. We need it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look. The best case scenario is that these attacks in the Middle East don't disrupt global supply chains, and we actually have falling inflation globally, brought down by goods, primarily. And what that would mean is that the central banks are likely done raising interest rates, including in Australia, and we could actually start seeing interest rate cuts towards the second half of this year. That's the best case scenario, and it would mean that basically this 18 months of pain that Australian households have suffered would start to alleviate, and we could also potentially see lower migration than what the federal government's forecast. That's more hopium and wishful thinking, but if we get that, that would also ease the rental crisis. So those are the two things I'm hoping happen this year.
Well, that would be a very happy new year. Leith Van Onselen, thanks so much for your time.
No worries, James. Anytime. Thanks.
Well, after the break, Australian-born Princess Mary set to become Queen of Denmark. I'll speak to a royal expert next. Welcome back. Now to the big royal story of the day. In just over a fortnight, Australian-born Princess Mary will become Queen of Denmark. This, of course, follows the shock abdication of Queen Margrethe during her New Year's Eve address. The 83-year-old announced that after 52 years on the Danish throne, she'll formally step down on January 14. Her eldest son, Prince Frederik, will become the new king, and his wife, Princess Mary from Hobart, will become Australia's first royal. Joining me now is royal expert Angela Levin. Angela, this is huge royal news, especially for us in Australia. But am I correct in saying there's not going to be an official coronation of Crown Prince Frederik like we saw for King Charles, or have I got that wrong?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, but today's newspapers were saying there will be a formal ceremony, but it won't be as elaborate as King Charles's was. But it's very early here in the UK, and it's January 1, and I don't think people have sort of got to grips with what's actually happened and hearing the news quite late yesterday.
Well, I'll tell you what, the Times in the UK haven't got to grips with it, because check out this headline from their newspaper. It says, Danish Queen's surprise abdication hands torch to son and his Scottish wife. Scottish? Since when has Princess Mary been referred to as Scottish? She's an Aussie, Hobart born and bred.
Well, I think maybe somebody had too much champagne in the evening and didn't concentrate. But it also shows you that the Times is getting a bit not meticulous in what they do. But the newspapers that I've been through today, I've been through about 4 of them, and they've all been accurate about it all. So it's quite shameful of the Times, I agree.
Absolutely.
But I think it would be a lovely sort of rom-com, isn't it? The way they met, so she didn't know he was a prince, and they had, got on very well, and then they had to meet secretly. And she's very much loved, and I think she's much loved here because Princess Catherine gets on with her very well, because she too had a non-regal upbringing, so they have something very much in common.
Yeah, it's an absolute fairy tale, isn't it? Let's talk about the British royal family. Now, we know they all gather at Sandringham for Christmas, but do they do anything for New Year's, or is it just like the rest of us, they all go to bed early?
We don't know. Then it's quiet. There's no journalists up there, and it's not. The King and Queen went to church yesterday, and that's all we know about it. But some of the royal family stay longer because it's a wonderful place to be for children and so on. But that's not covered by the press.
I was interested at Christmas with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, being welcomed back into the fold and joining the family. Her former husband, Prince Andrew, was there, but he's still very much on the outer, isn't he?
Yes, he's very much on the outside, but King Charles has made obvious decision that there's a family relationship with him and that what his work is for the country. He's not allowed to do anything. He's not allowed to go into any engagements. He can't be called HRH. So but he is a member of the family. And Fergie, as she's known as, it was the first time in 32 years that she joined the family for Christmas. The late Duke of Edinburgh couldn't stand her and wouldn't let her come anywhere near it at Christmas, so she had to hire a little cottage nearby. But her children, it was upsetting for them that they didn't have their mother with them. But the Queen felt that, had conversations with her, chats, because she quite liked her. She quite liked her eccentricity, really. Last year she came just for the lunch. Queen Camilla is very obliging. She doesn't hold grudges. Right. And she felt it was about time that, she was drawn back into the family. She's been very supportive of her husband. She's been a very good mother. And so that happened last year. It obviously went very well. So this year she came and joined them to go to this morning service at church.
Well, Angela, tell me this. Fergie's been brought back into the fold, but speaking about people on the outer, Harry and Meghan, do you think they'll ever be brought back in?
I hope not, actually. I think that they've been so horrendous to the royal family, and I fear that if they do come back, as Harry is alleged to want, Meghan does not. I hope I never go to that country again, she said. But he might just take down chats and then sell it on to other people. The trouble is you can't trust them. They also lie about things. And I think it's terrible. One of the papers I was reading this morning said they should go on, they need money all the time. That go on, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. And I think they felt that might be the best thing. But really, there's making a few complaints, but you go on and on and on about it, and a lot of it was not true.
Angela, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. I know you're not a fan of Harry, but just supposing he was to be brought back in, what would it take for Prince Harry to be at a point where he'd be acceptable to the family?
Well, I wrote Prince Harry's biography in 2018. I spent 15 months with him, so I do know him well. So it's not that I don't like him, it's how he's changed. But first of all, he's got to apologise hugely, and he's also got to compromise, and he won't compromise. He keeps saying he wants the King and Prince William to apologise for things going right back to childhood when William got 5 sausages, he got 4. It's that sort of pettiness as well as him feeling very badly dealt with. But, if you want to bring back a family argument, you have to spend time. He can't rush here, stay for half an hour, then rush away. It takes weeks, months even. And of course, he's very much under Meghan's thumb. And he will listen to what she says. But he has to compromise. He has to be trusted, and he has to say he's sorry for the terrible things that he said about his father, his stepmother, and his brother and his sister-in-law, who he once said that she was the daughter, the sister he'd always wanted. But he doesn't want to give an inch.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like anything's going to change anytime soon. Angela, just before I let you go, King Charles will visit Australia later this year. It's his first visit down under in about 6 years. We've felt a bit neglected down under.
Yes, I mean, I can see that. But of course, you've got to say how COVID made a big hole in anybody going anywhere for a long time. And I think he's worked very hard. I think also they knew that the Queen was very ill. And if you come away for a long trip, which it has to be because it's so far away, it's very difficult. I think a lot of those things mattered. He took on mountains of work from his mother, but he does love Australia. He's very keen on it. So I think he'll get a very smiley, happy, very, very happy king who's got a very supportive wife, and you'll enjoy seeing them.
Well, I mean, if he doesn't get here soon, we'd be quite happy with William and Kate. They can visit anytime they want. Angela Levin, very good to have you on the program. Thanks for your time. Well, after the break, the ABC under fire for its woke and politically charged Sydney fireworks coverage last night. I'll unpack all of that and more with my panel in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm James McPherson, filling in for Andrew Bolt. Well, we're only one day into the new year and already the ABC is under fire, this time for last night's racially charged Sydney fireworks coverage. ABC host Charlie Pickering began the broadcast with this.
I'm Zan Rowe.
And I'm Charlie Pickering. We are thrilled to be coming to you live from Gadigal Land for the New Year's Eve celebrations.
Gadigal Land, OK, we expect that from the ABC, but then viewers had to sit through the now obligatory Welcome to Country, during which Joanne Bell lauded an Aboriginal who fought against Europeans.
To kick things off, our Welcome to Country, performed by Auntie Joan Bell and Paquita Bell.
My name is Joan Bell. I am a proud Wiradjuri Gadigal woman. We honour our elders and leaders, including Barangaroo, Pemaway and many others who fought the first boat people who landed in Sydney Cove.
Fought the first boat people who arrived. OK, whatever. But then right before the 9 p.m. fireworks, when children around the country were tuning in, the ABC showed a performance from Indigenous group 3% that really annoyed parents in particular. And I can understand why. Have a listen.
It's the stolen generations and trauma that I see. And that's a part of history on which we never speak. Always moving backwards keeps the future out of reach. Let's separate the men from the boys. They got that money on the market and they failed to hear the voice. They stole the land in the name of their kings. Now look at how they act when you mention Alice Springs. You know that
It's all pretty angry. They locked us up and threw away the key. Stolen generations. Aboriginal people are always moving backwards. Australians failed to hear the voice. Australians stole their land. Happy New Year, kids, from your friends at the ABC. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Sky News contributor Evelyn Ray and history lecturer and author Stephen Shavura. Stephen, if this is what we're going to be served up on New Year's Eve, do you reckon most Australians will want Indigenous groups curating the 9 p.m. fireworks again?
No, and this is just the ABC's last hurrah. They lost the voice and they have to have the last word. And of course, these sorts of things, all they tell Australians, and we've got to be careful that these performers and these activists do not necessarily speak for the majority of Indigenous Australians, but essentially their message is, you are our enemies. You are our enemies. And that is only, it's not just going to make a lot of Australians just sort of not want sort of more Indigenous issues and organisers involved in New Year's Eve, but it's just going to set any legitimate cause for Indigenous Australians back. Because when you just keep pummeling the Australian public, calling them invaders, and saying ridiculous things like, we never talk about this. I mean, it's all we ever talk about. Right. I mean, where have these people actually been? You keep sending these messages, Australians are just going to say, fine, if we're the enemy, well, why would we help you? Yeah. You've just declared us the enemy. And I'm not saying that's what was going through their minds with the voice, but we saw a spectacular instance of how all this flunks with the voice, which failed so badly.
Evelyn, let me go to you. Is New Year's Eve fireworks the right platform to start doing social justice conversations?
Look, the simple answer is no, a big fat no. But look, there's very few things that's left for children and for families to enjoy that's not infested with political messaging from these overrepresented, noisy minority groups. Look, nobody wants a side of guilt with their fireworks, their families and the music. But this is the problem with the ABC. When your salary is paid by taxes, you don't have to worry about what viewers think because you know that you're going to be getting paid regardless of that. And if you privatise the ABC or if you made it a subscription base, I guarantee you that the network would be broke within 6 months and they would go under. And perhaps that's what us Australians should be pushing for.
I think you're probably right about that. Well, social engineers are at it again, trying to change how we speak to each other. Quality advocates want a language overhaul as part of an update to what they say are out-of-date anti-discrimination laws in New South Wales. Now, part of the language they want to change includes saying sibling instead of brother and sister, and you've got to say different sex. You're not allowed to say opposite sex. Stephen, this attack on language, is it really about inclusion or is there something else going on here?
Yeah, well, the progressive left behind this, they know very well that the way we think is to a large extent determined by our words and our language. And if they can control the language that we hear, if they can control the words that we hear, the language that we speak, then indirectly over time they know that they can control people's thoughts. And what this is ultimately about is controlling people's thoughts through controlling the language. They say things like, oh, we've got to get with the times, but really they're trying to drag the times over to where they are, and the only way they can do it is with propaganda and state coercion, and this is just a perfect instance of it.
Well, Evan, let me go to you. News from America, where USA Boxing have just announced that men identifying as women will be allowed to fight in a female category, provided they've had a sex change and maintain low testosterone levels. Now, Australian boxer Ebony Bridges has slammed the decision on Twitter, writing, "This is wrong on so many levels. I will never agree to this. It's bad enough having trans women breaking records in other sports like track and field, swimming and powerlifting, but it's a bit different to them breaking our skulls in combat sport where the aim is to hurt you." Evelyn, would you want one of your female friends or family members paired in the ring against a transgendered boxer?
Look, I don't know about you, James, but I'm old enough to remember a time when violence against women was frowned upon, not something we would search to find loopholes in or technicalities to get around. I mean, we've already seen overseas the repercussions of biological men versus women in violent sports, such as skulls being completely fractured. It is appalling and it has to stop. And unfortunately, the only way it will end is if women just refuse to compete against biological men. I mean, sure, it might cost them a few medals in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to ensure that every gold medal in the future is given to a woman. And I mean, it's one thing having to put up with pronouns and walking on eggshells, but I actually think the sports movement is going to be the transgender movement's undoing, because people might tolerate the eggshell walking and the pronouns, but what they're not going to tolerate is seeing their daughters and their sisters getting beaten up by blokes in the ring. The average Australian and the average person won't put up with it.
I read this bit of news and I thought, is it going to take a woman being killed to finally end this transgender madness? Anyway, let's go to other news. It may be the start of a new year, but many of the same debates rage, with as many as 80 councils across Australia dumping citizenship ceremonies on January 26. Now, you'd think that receiving your Australian citizenship on Australia Day would be a great honour, but a growing number of councils are refusing to hold events this year, thanks to the Albanese government, which revoked a rule that effectively forced local councils to hold ceremonies on Australia Day. Stephen, how do you think new citizens will feel about being unable to receive their citizenship on Australia Day because woke councils say, oh, we don't want to upset Indigenous people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to necessarily speak for all sort of new immigrants, new citizens, but what I will say is that these local councils need to remember that these people are becoming citizens of Australia, not citizens of the Sydney Council, not citizens of the Melbourne Council, but citizens of Australia. And there is no mandate from Australians to change that date. And so they're arrogating a right to do something that they have no right to do. These are people who are becoming citizens of Australia, and that particular ceremony should reflect the national law and the sort of the national feel that the 26th of January is the day of celebration, the day to do such things.
Yeah, very good point, Stephen. Evelyn, Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore, she says that the 26th of January is a painful day. It's distressing. For Indigenous people, it's a hurtful day. But at the same time, Sydney Council put on a whole host of Australia Day activities. So it's kind of hypocritical, isn't it? If it's a painful, terrible day, then scrap everything, surely.
Yeah, it's up there with every other Invasion Day politician who complains about colonisation, all whilst pocketing the King's currency. You'd think for such moral advocates, these sorts of people wouldn't want to participate in receiving dirty money. But, you know, consistency isn't something we have come to expect from these sorts. There are many days on the Australian calendar that are dedicated to Indigenous Australians. I mean, I can't even count how many, but I can count the ones that are purely dedicated for all Australians on 2 fingers, and they are not happy with those. And, you know, we're being told that there's issues with them. It's not so much a concern for Indigenous Australians as much as it is a hatred for the white man. And we have seen it time and time again. And we need to start electing politicians who love Australia, not just minority groups, but the whole of Australia, and not those who are going to apologise for who we are and what our grandparents built so that we can all live freely and prosper here in our nation, unlike many nations across the globe who unfortunately don't get to live as privileged as we do.
Well, here we are on January the 1st. I suspect we'll be having this debate for the next 4 weeks. Well, thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Stephen. Hey, stick around after the break. We'll head to the UK, where an election is very likely this year, but bad news for Rishi Sunak. The opposition is leading in the polls. That and more in just a moment. Welcome back. Let's head to the UK, where New Year's celebrations are just wrapping up for some. Joining me from London is writer and commentator Esther Kraku. Esther, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year to you too.
Well, it's about 9 a.m. there. You look pretty good for someone at 9 a.m. on New Year's Day.
Yes, I'm under a mountain of concealer.
Hey, let's start with politics. This year is set to be an election year in the UK. Labour leader Keir Starmer is leading in the polls. Just imagine with me, what would a Keir Starmer-led UK look like if he manages to get up and win?
Well, this is the million-dollar question, because we don't actually know, because not even knowing his political convictions, we actually don't know what his policy agenda will be. I mean, we've seen some hints of what his immigration policy would be, particularly to do with the small boats, and it's looking a lot like Tory policy. You know, his officials are contemplating an offshoring scheme, much like the Rwanda policy that they've been so disparaging of over the last 18 months. But we really don't know his stance on anything, on what economic policy would be, on many fronts, really. And the issue here is Keir Starmer is someone who's effectively changed his political opinion so much. This was Jeremy Corbyn's right-hand man. This is someone that back in 2009 was petitioning an Islamist terrorist group that was banned in Germany, and petitioning the ECHR to say that they should actually be allowed to operate because their human rights were being breached. This is someone that has always been consistently very far left. But suddenly now he seems like the second incoming of Tony Blair. So we really don't know what to expect. And that's the frightening thing. I think the Tories have created such dissatisfaction that we might end up getting, a worse version of the Labour Party that we don't even expect, because we don't know.
Well, like you, I'm not sure what Keir Starmer's economics or foreign policy is like, but if he's to become England's next PM, I hope it's better than his biology. Here he is 2 years ago insisting that it's not only women who can have a cervix.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right. But
And a few months ago, he had to clarify for the Sunday Times that women don't have penises, or at least, and I quote, 99.9% of women don't have a penis, he said. This issue's been a big problem for the Labour leader, this idea of what is a woman and how do you define a woman. How do you lead a world power in a dangerous world if you either don't know what a woman is or you're too afraid to say?
Yes, I mean, he really underestimated how much this would be a problem for him. But people are right to ask the question because this is someone that could potentially be leading this country and he doesn't even know what half of the population is. He's been known within his party to treat the whole trans issue as something that's, you know, a cultural problem. It's not really relevant, but it does have practical implications, specifically on the legal level. If you can't even define what a woman is, you end up having biological men that are clearly mentally unwell for a good chunk of them, or predators that end up in women's prisons, in women's toilets, in women's sports, for instance. And this is something that he really needs to grapple with. The reality is, the heart of the issue is, we don't know this man's political convictions because he's a fraud, because he's changed his opinions on so many things, because all he wants is to gain power. And unfortunately, the Tories have basically left the country with no other option. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party aren't leading in the polls because there's such huge enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. Most people don't know where he stands. But it's because the Tory party have let the country down so much that we effectively have no other alternative.
Amazing. Let's go to European politics. Former Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage has made headlines suggesting the European Union could be at the beginning of its end, at least in its current form. And he says that's because of the populist surge that we're seeing across Europe. You've got the likes of Geert Wilders winning the Dutch election. You've got Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Marine Le Pen in France. And take a look at this other European politician who fills me with great hope for the future of Europe, Swedish European Parliament member Sarah Skyttedal, taking down her Irish counterpart Mick Wallace over his anti-Israel stance. Have a listen to this.
This is a war that started because of terrorism, a war between a democratic state and a terrorist group. But in your upside-down world, you are calling the democratic state the terrorists, and not even mentioning the atrocities committed by Hamas. This, my dear colleagues, is a clear example of the batshit crazy left that does not belong in any elected chamber, let alone this one.
Esther, I like her style. Are we finally starting to see a pushback against progressivism throughout Europe?
I mean, this was always going to be one of the problems that the EU has to deal with. I'm even surprised that it's managed to survive this long with such fractures amongst its member states. The reality is, I mean, from its inception, the EU was either too big or too misaligned with many of the founding members. And this is the problem that you're having now. I mean, for the fact that most EU member states don't actually have a lot of flexibility when it comes to their own immigration is really starting to bite them, because now they're noticing, you know, lack of integration of many mass migration groups, you know, the downward pressure that mass migration is having on wages, and so many associated issues. And, you know, this is one of the things that we cited in Brexit, but it's becoming really well known in other European countries, and it's really becoming a bone of contention. I think Nigel Farage is right in the sense that this could be something that would be a prolonged issue for the EU, because you do need to give member states a degree of flexibility. But it's also the principle of the nation state. If you can't control your own borders, you don't have a country. Yeah. And for people to be told that they're xenophobic or horrible because they don't want certain groups into their country is really going to be the EU's undoing.
Esther, we've only got a short time left, but quickly I want to talk about a Sudanese man who snuck into Britain illegally, and now he's being allowed to remain in the country on human rights grounds, despite the fact MI5 warn he's an ISIS fanatic who poses a terror threat. This is a joke, surely.
Yes, apparently the human rights of the British public don't seem to matter very much in this case. But this man is clearly an ISIS propagandist. You know, issues with integration, particularly with refugees, has always been a big problem. Since 1998, 1 in 4 terrorist offences have had to do with people from asylum backgrounds. And so that's something that we really have to focus on. The fact that this man is being allowed to remain in the UK, even though he's propagandizing on behalf of terrorist groups, just shows the state of asylum in this country.
Absolutely amazing. Esther Krakow, thank you so much for your time. Well, that's it from me. I'll be back tomorrow night, but stick around because up next, an encore of Piers Morgan's interview with Jordan Peterson. You do not want to miss it.